So this time around, what made you like come out here?
We are continuing to see successful enterprise play products showing up in the SMB mid-market. So I think coming to Black Hat last year, the last 2 years, and then also RSA, you get a lot of exposure to those. I hadn't seen that company before.
Yeah.
Right? So that's been my
you're
draw.
no stranger to traveling.
I'm not. Yes, I'm not.
But I have to tell you, you're slacking off because I check your blog. I check your blog, and you haven't updated a travel blog for a while.
I haven't. You're not wrong. That project, in fact, I'm not calling out anybody in specific, but that project might be owned by a certain human that's here with us and not being updated. Yes.
Yeah. You need to get right on it.
That's a great call out. That's my call to action from David Raviv today, is to finish keeping my blog up to date.
And listen, you've been involved in the cybersecurity space for about 10 years now, maybe more.
Yeah.
And listen, you made a real impact. First of all, you built a community and I'm not saying it to butter you up. I have no reason to, but you really do. And it's funny because there's a lot of people that do stuff, but they don't really give back. They stay behind the scenes. You don't really know what they're doing and so on. There's tons of that. But you go out there, you put yourself out there because again, it's not easy. But people don't realize this. Listen, there's a lot of people that just are bystanders in cybersecurity. That they go out there, they don't contribute a lot. What specifically made you decide to really go out there and just put yourself out there and give back?
It's a great question. I think that for me it was, I've been an engineer. I've lived on that executive side as well, and I get to see the business needs and the engineering sides of those kind of on both sides. But what drove me specifically to go out there and put it out there is I just felt there was such a gap in knowledge, right? It was one of those things where I was sitting around going, man, if I only knew some of the stuff that I'm talking about now before I got punched in the face, right? Before we got ransomed, before we had these things happen. And I don't know, I just felt the call to action, right? It's mission serving. Yeah. I feel like somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And we need more of that, I think, collectively. We seem like we're always behind the eight ball as an industry. I think that a lot of the adversaries collaborate. They have their own forums. They share, and yet from our end, we don't do as much. I don't know why. It's just maybe people are just reluctant to. Yeah,
I think some of the people I know that are the smartest people I know won't go on live social media, won't show up with their name, and their argument is, well, I don't want my name out there. I don't want people to know stuff about me. And so I think you might have a bit of the really raw security humans are also a little bit paranoid, right? Just because we know what can happen. But I think to your point, more of us should get out there and share. I've met many engineers that have humbly served in the service, done way more than I could ever hope to do in my life, right? There's many names. I bet you could come up with 10, 15 of them right now. Yeah. And I think that they need to get out and claim it. Our industry is needing to have people out there being those advocates and drivers. And to your point, though, sharing in the community at the deep engineering level happens all the time, right? Go to DEF CON, go sit through those sessions, and you'll see that deep collaboration.
That's right.
But at the enterprise and C-suite level and talking about our mistakes and talking about our failures, we don't share. Right, as companies, we don't share the legal reasons, the risk, the image, right. But you're seeing that shift, David. Right, we're seeing it be more valuable and conducive to be transparent and humble as a company about your situation from a cyber perspective. That's right.
And other things that I've seen, there's a big trend to outsource a lot of these security controls. So MSSP and MSP are now one of the fastest growing segments in cybersecurity because people realize that they don't have the capacity, don't have the ability to do all those security controls.
Sure.
And they want somebody else to do it. So now you have, I don't know what the numbers are, 70,000 MSPs or
massive quantities, globally.
And they are struggling.
Sure.
Because they are supposed to be like the be all and end all of security, but they don't have the knowledge and the means to do it.
Not even that. The whole problem is these enterprises that have said, here, David, Mr. MSSP, you do it, are also thinking, I've handed this off to David. But that's not how this works. Security doesn't happen as some abject thing you can buy separate out there that just fixes things. It's a collaborative process. I have to know where your data is. I have to know what it's used for. I have to know where it's used. I have to know the regulatory pieces about it. I have to know your compliance and how you're dealing with things. And so all of those are part of that picture. And trying to just outsource some of it, while it's a valuable way to get benefits of scale and knowledges of scale and a lot of that kind of stuff that can happen, it's really probably just telemetry until it's made business context and understand what it actually means to your organization and how you respond and all of those things. So I think the real problem is that we're trying to keep passing the buck as enterprise to other people to do the work, not realizing security has to be an endemic part of everything you do. It has to be understood inside. Now, are you going to hire expertise and outside people to bolt that in? Yeah, that's why it's the fastest growing segment, period. But you hit this problem on the head of these people are suffering because there's still not that collaboration. There's still not a well-defined shared responsibility matrix. There's not those things. And so,
I think a lot of them are, faking it until they make it.
Yeah, true story. Yeah, they are.
So, so you go out and you're an evangelist today,
Sure.
right? So you go out and talk to a lot of service providers and talk about best practices, how they should kind of conduct a business, what's the best way to approach security as a whole, as a holistic solution. What would you say are the kind of the top three things that come to mind from a service provider for them to be more effective and do a better job at servicing their customers?
I think the top one is definitely stop trying to be the smartest guy or gal in the room, right? One of the biggest things that I think happens is MSPs, MSSPs have a service. I offer EMDR, or I offer this, or I offer that. But they're not shooting from a framework or from something that they can compare that to that is the industry standard. And so I think the first thing of any practitioner out there that is offering security services or technology services, pick a framework and start to align with it. Whether that's CIS for the top 18 and the 153 controls therein, CSF and now CSF 2.0, which actually has call outs for governance, which is great, right? So those are the things where I think the first one is have a framework, something you're aligning to.
Now, here's a question for you. Double click on that. Does it matter which framework or a framework? Or do you have one? You mentioned a few, but do you care?
For all those watching, if you're in CIS or other camps, I would probably say you need to pick a framework that makes sense, that's more security and pragmatic. If you're governed by one, you have to pick that one, right? If you're, in CMMC or DIB land, then you're going to be 800-171 or 853. But if you're just a general business and you're trying to solve this challenge of what does the totality of cybersecurity need to look like, CIS is the answer, right? It's just very pragmatic. The 18 have 153 total subcontrols. They're organized in groups 1, 2, and 3, which allows you to kind of iterate through those. But I'd say that you probably couldn't go wrong with any of the others out there either. And the reason is CIS crosswalks to NIST, crosswalks to Cyber Essentials, crosswalks to the Essential 8. So you see that crosswalkability. And at the end of the day, these aren't like brilliant things, David. These are stove hot, don't touch stove, right? This isn't earth shattering.
This is so true. And people don't realize to get your cybersecurity hygiene elevated, you don't need to be a rocket scientist. Let me just say it right now.
Yeah.
You don't.
Let's look at 3CX, home computer, home asset, and software compromise. Let's look at LastPass, home computer, home asset. Well, right there in CIS, it says, hey, listen, have your asset have a baseline security, have your asset have no local admin. Well, that's probably not describing your home computer, right? And so you see these things that are quite basic that really make such a difference. And yet, I think CISOs argue about that every day and are challenged by that. And obviously, they're also faced with budgetary and other things that come into play in that. But I think general basic hygiene is really not all that complex. It's just pick one and start. Which brings me back to my second point.
That's right.
I don't think people just start often. They dig way in the weeds. They dig way into looking at the problem, and they get into paralysis analysis, right? Analysis paralysis. And it's interesting because start with a crappy policy. Start where you are. Start with what you can accomplish. Start with what you can prove you accomplished. Do that over and over again, and then iterate upon it and make it better, right? And I think people get lost too quickly in letting perfect be the enemy of good.
And I think they also get bogged down into the weeds in terms of what type of tools they're going to be using.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times it doesn't really matter that much, right?
Right. Well, and I think that's what's great about that is, you're kind of reading my playbook right now, is that I'm working to map a lot of the products that are on our line card for our partners to the CIS, right? To those CIS safeguards, and saying, how does this one help meet that safeguard, to surface that, right? And I think to your point, it really doesn't matter what tool you pick. It's what's the best set of tools you can use that meet the need for this one, 9.5, implement DMARC. Well, how am I going to implement DMARC? I could do it a lot of ways, but I first need to know what I'm trying to accomplish so that I can understand the why, and then hopefully map something that's the product that solves that.
So it's so interesting because that is by far one of the best advice, I think, for anybody even walking the floor of RSA, right? How do you map? You look at your whatever compliance, whatever your framework that you follow, and then find the gaps that you may have, and then figure out which vendors are now, fill that gap. Now, are vendors, you know where I'm going to.
I do.
Are vendors aware that they have to map themselves into a certain framework, or they just kind of willy-nilly say they're going to solve everything?
I have a theory I talk about a lot. It's called the middle theory. And maybe I'm just restating capitalism, but it's this understanding that products never rise much above or fall very much below the middle layer of their consuming entity's maturity. Meaning, if most of the people buying your product are happy with a fork that cuts them because it's rough edged, you're not incentivized to buff that fork one last time before taking it out of production, right? There's this maturity consume piece. And I think most vendors have never, even the ones that sell products to protect us, don't do the basic hygienic things inside their own organization, let alone, and then don't have and maintain the expertise to necessarily even map that. And I can tell you that with empirical proof. I, a year ago, asked all of our vendors, 70 of them, to map themselves to CIS, right? To say, listen, just in one lens, what do you do for people when they're trying to use your tool? I got 16 responses back. Of those 16, maybe 4 were usable and had any understanding of what I did that wasn't just like somebody going, I'm just here so I don't get fined.
Was it before ChatGPT or after?
Oh, that's so funny. I bet they'd be much more robust now, right? Here's the mapping. Done. Enjoy, boys. The following parameters. Yeah, no doubt. That's funny. One check for David, actually. That's great. But you're right. None. And vendors just don't understand. Now, once it's explained and they understand, hey, this is the same thing as a cross-sell matrix. This is the same thing as helping, exactly to your point, visualize the gaps, find out where lookout security meets this or LastPass solves that or whatever it may be, and then walk the floor, right? And they don't map. And so I'm now doing that mapping myself with their subject matter experts, locking ourselves in a room for an hour and saying, let's rack this down, boys, right? So, yeah, it's been fantastic. But you hit the nail on the head. You're reading my book too much.
and then you mentioned there's a third point maybe that you can recommend for I don't know if it was the third one that you mentioned. It was 1 and 2, and then I said maybe it's the third one.
Yeah, so the first is, right, this is going to be pick a framework. Number 2 is just get started and be there and do it, right? And then the third one, I think, is always be critical of yourself, right? I think you could say be humble. You could say other things. I guess we're getting on the understanding the middle theory, but always be critical of yourself. I don't ever look at work I did yesterday and think, man, that's the best job I could do. Most best, not even a usage of proper English, right? See there, I fail. But I don't ever look back and go, that's the best thing I could have done. I hope to look back and go, wow, I could have improved that. Wow, that could have been better. I missed this here. And even if you're judging a B to an A, always be critical. So the last piece I would say is always do after action reviews, always iterate, always improve, right? So if I said start where you are as 2, step 3 is always improve. You can't be perfect. It's not possible. And in our body of knowledge, it's not ever possible. It's always going to change. I'm going to have to reassess my criticality of something that I wasn't even planning for, potentially.
And I think one of the key challenges as well is for these MSPs, especially the ones dealing with the smaller side of the house, the SMBs. That's first and foremost, it's the backbone of the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's 42% or something of our GDP.
That's right. And then secondly, they're the most vulnerable. And they're also the ones who get hacked because they,
it's easy target.
Easy target.
I can make a lot more money on the other side of the fence.
That's right. So how do you take, let's say somebody takes on a new client. Where do you start? How do you get from the point that you have to assess what they currently have, and then move them into that journey? That maturity model where you go from basic to get to a good place.
Yeah, That's a great question. Just like you said, they're smaller, they're more vulnerable, they have less resources. Typically, they're not as resource dense.
But they do get hacked a lot,
They
right?
do. Oh, every day. I mean,
Right.
probably more than, I bet at this point in time, the data would suggest that SMBs are getting hacked faster and more than these larger players, just because they don't make the news, right?
That's right. And I will also say that some of these SMBs are somebody's third party.
Oh, totally. Yeah, easily. I've seen several of them myself personally. So, you look at that, and these SMBs, MSPs, they're all juicy, rich targets for the threat actor, and they're getting popped every day. But I was saying, in the same breath, they're also fast and flexible, and they're usually operationally quick enough that if you got them convinced, they could do it almost overnight. They could do things. So I think there's two things playing out for the SMB that are in our favor. Number one would be is if you apply national cybersecurity strategy that's coming out from the Biden White House, I don't care the politics of it, just the understanding of it, is that we're going to have to say that these defenseless people shouldn't be the ones that are holding that risk. And, it goes back to, I had a conversation with Neha at Microsoft, and we were talking about how us as IPs, PAX8, or as ISPs or CSPs in general, have a very low adoption rate of MFA at a high level, like 29% across the board. It's brutal.
That is amazing. Still.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. 20, that's it?
And the ask was, Matt,
Well,
do we need to teach your MSPs to be better? Do we need to help make better? And I turned it around and said, why don't you just turn it on by default? Oh, we could never do it. Well, then we're in the same exact capitalistic shit pool, aren't we, right now? Right?
But hold on, why can't they do it?
And it's that fear of loss of client, for the same frustration of this is just not easy, it's not fast, I don't want to deal with it, this is who's coming after little old me. It's that same problem, which has been getting better. I would argue most people in SMB now are at least asking the question of cybersecurity. I think that's now at a point where insurance has driven that point home really poignantly.
Yeah, that's right. Insurance is driving it, right?
Oh,
so
massively.
you have to have MFA, I think, by default.
But at least to try to get insured. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of that's driving. So is that enough? Should the government step in and use compliance to enforce?
I think what it comes down to is if you look out your window, which I guess there's not many cars right here, but if you happen to be looking out over some fictional window that had cars out there, you're not going to see a car that would kill you inherently. You wouldn't see a car out there that hasn't been through some form of testing. You wouldn't see a car that doesn't have airbags. You wouldn't see a car that doesn't have basic safety equipment, period. You can trust in the fact that that car is going to at least hit a pole and you'll probably survive it. And that's likely, right? Well, that's where we have to get with cybersecurity too. Microsoft can't sell a product that doesn't have MFA. Google can't sell a product that doesn't have MFA. They need to stop selling products that are insecure by default and instead sell products that are secure that I have to then undo. If you see that shift happen, and you see right now a lot of forces coming together around the SMB where if I started a new company today, there is zero chance, 0.1 maybe, and it would only be if I have a certain vertical that requires it, that I have a server. I'm probably on some identity platform like Microsoft or Okta or Google. I'm probably going to be then taking that identity platform into SaaS applications and having some degree of a shared responsibility matrix with those humans.
But double click on that one.
Okay.
The shared responsibility model is a little bit elusive because
it's nascent today, right?
Yeah,
it's non-existent in most
and
cases.
it makes people feel comfortable, which is almost the opposite of what it's supposed to be.
But in the same breath, what you can do if you force the first thing I said, which is secure by default, I now have 1 or 7 throats to choke. I have Toyota, I have Ford, I have Chevy, I have, right?
Tesla.
And Tesla, sure. But the point being, I can control that easier as a government. If I was looking at that, I can regulate that easier. If I had 5 million car manufacturers, I'd have challenges regulating that. Look at the FAA with experimental planes.
And we do.
Right?
I think the cybersecurity industry is one of the only industry that does not have certain liability where you create products that you don't.
They yule it away.
If it doesn't work, well, too bad.
I only owe you what you paid me. Sorry.
We're very sorry.
Yeah,
we're sorry for your loss.
And that was also part of the cybersecurity strategy, right?
That's
Which is saying you can't just yule away gross risk and gross negligence, and you can't just yule those things, which obviously you can't yule away negligence, but they do it all the time. I mean, if you really looked and could explain cyber and what people did, it's negligent to let your home computer user.
I think they hide behind the complexity.
They do, right? And it's going to change. They're going to have more me's on their subject matter experts being able to talk to non-nerds.
Because if something blows up, it's super difficult to
prove, explain, get a jury to get it.
That's right.
It's a prosecutorial challenge.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they hide behind that. So, but we're moving. I think that there's a little bit of a change. I think
agreed.
So in terms of what Pax8 does, right? So you look at a lot of vendors on a
Sure.
regular basis, and eventually some of them make it to their roster.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that ecosystem that you guys built, and why is it so important for these MSSP to use you as a customer?
You know me, I don't do shameless plugs very much.
That's
but
right.
I would say that Pax8 has, before their time, required things that would have made a maturity possible anyway. What I mean by that is 5 years ago, they wouldn't still let you come on their line card if you didn't have full API access so that we could actually provision instantly. That was the whole shtick, right? Was being a faster distribution because distribution was broken. But what that also enabled is if someone had APIs 5 years ago that were able to do those things, they're also doing a lot of things inside their organization that are modern, that are more, modern practices, likely. But in addition to that, when we started...
It reminds me of people who say that if you want to check the cleanliness of a restaurant, you should check the restrooms.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
like if somebody has API access like 5 years
and
ago...
it's healthy and it looks logical and it's not silly cobbled together.
Right.
Yeah.
So most likely they do everything else right.
That's the guessing game, right?
That's right.
So Pax8, because of that, when I came on and we'd already been doing security assessments, but we've ramped them up, right? Like now we're doing ASVS, which is Application Security Verification Standard, to say, are you even designing your application well? And everybody else had to just ask, do you use MFA? Do you like they're asking those internal questions, but we're looking at application safety and security design too, right? But I think to the point, we wanted to vet those companies in a way and bring them on slowly over a lot of time and a lot of discovery.
So you answer the question, who's guarding the guards?
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
thing, right?
Which it's not good enough yet either. I think there's a real room for improvement in our industry. There are backup vendors that I've met that are holding a lot of very, very sensitive data, and they're just now switching from one regular AV product to an EDR, but with no management, no SIEM. And I'm going, how does this even work? I mean, you're passing a SOC 2 because SOC 2 is not all that hard to accomplish with that, but it doesn't speak towards security. Really, it speaks towards some organization controls that you're at least healthy enough to have them.
And it's super interesting because the SMBs are not sophisticated enough to ask those questions.
No, or understand the answers.
Or the MSP either. Like they just don't. They're not aware.
They're getting there. The MSPs for sure. I mean, if you had said that to me 3 years ago, I'd have said, yeah, none of them. But now I have the glorious benefit of hanging out with some really cool MSPs that are getting it. They really get it, and they're starting to ask those questions and starting to be able to say, no, I need to know how your coding practice is functioning. I need to know how you actually implement code. I need to know how you actually handle your supply chain risk. I want to know how you handle.
So is that a continuous process?
Yes.
Because again, it's an ever evolving. The whole thing with vendors, it's like there's always something in the next release, right?
Yep.
So you continuously looking at what the vulnerabilities are and how to mitigate those.
Yeah, maybe not at a direct tactical level with them, right? Not in that sense. But we're definitely looking at what is the next thing that we're going to have to do to raise the bar, right? A great example, I volunteer for CompTIA quite a bit. And
that's right.
One of the programs I'm working on is Trustmark with Chris Johnson. But there's also even maybe the ideas of taking that out to a vendor level and maybe having some certified process that actually assesses security, not compliance, right? And it's hard to separate the two. You can't live without security or compliance in that two-sided coin. But somebody that's actually assessing the efficacy of the way you wrote your controls, the efficacy of the way the practitioner would understand what you actually protected. And I think that's getting better too. I think organizations are getting better at assessing that, especially if you start using the lens like CIS, where you're now going, okay, show me how you're tracking assets. Show me how you're actually managing these. I want to see where you disabled an account. All the stuff you get in your normal SOC, but from a security lens with much deeper kind of assessment capabilities coming. So.
Now, how do these MSSPs balance out the fact that they're, look, at the end of the day, everybody's in business to do business,
sure.
right? To grow the revenue, and it's always the MRR, like marginal revenue.
Yep.
So how do they balance all of that with, and again, it's also an art form, who to accept as a customer sometimes.
Sure.
Right?
Oh yeah, don't get me started. It's a whole other diatribe.
So how do you balance all of that out with, picking the right vendor, doing the right thing, pleasing them? I mean, it's just so many moving parts that are associated with running a successful MSSPs.
And also growing understanding of the threat landscape, right? I mean, if you look at this, I had a buddy of mine, Carl Bickmore, that always used to say his clients called him $2 Carl. And it was because every time he's coming around, he's needing $2 more an endpoint for that, or $4 more a person for, right? So they call him $2 Carl.
But it all adds up, right?
It all adds up.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's because, oh gosh, I really didn't think about how a password manager would change this, or oh, I didn't really think that. And so there's actually adding features and functions on a constant basis too, right? I mean, just walk the vendor floor out here at RSA and see how many new concepts and thoughts are being laid out of things you need to be worried about, that you need to be dealing with. I mean, especially around supply chain, SBOM, you know, there's tons of things around.
Yeah, but the question always remains if like how true or you know, how risky it is, because again, you can't plan for absolutely everything.
No,
you know, like
right.
you know, this the odds of hitting by an asteroid is X, but
There's
nobody's
a number.
planning. Yeah, there's a number, right?
Yeah.
But nobody has that in their recovery planning because maybe it's too much.
Yep.
So how do you quantify and make sure that you are actually get the best bang for the buck, meaning that you are addressing the most likelihood for the least amount of money, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what CIS does a pretty good job of crowdsourcing, community sourcing, is that regard of what should I do first? Well, if you don't know what assets you have, you're not going to be able to protect them. What should I do second? Well, if you don't know what software you're using, then you sure can't tell me what data you use, right? And so you get into it where following the frameworks for those things, I feel like a broken record or a one-string guitar sometimes, David, because it all comes back to following the framework.
What about the outliers? You know, the things that you can't see coming out of left field.
And this is where you're never going to win. I mean, when we think about it, before governance, which now comes in and it messes up my whole story. But right now you have identify, protect on the NIST wheel, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. If I understand that correctly, there are 3/5 after the explosion and only 2/5 before it. And I think the thing is, we think about this wrong. Our vendors, that whole floor out there, they're wrong. They say protects you from this, stops all threats.
That's right.
Never allows this. All the same shit that Carter's Pills would say as they rolled their little wagon into some podunk town to sell pills and snake oil.
But
right?
you still have a lot of friends, you know,
I know,
Matt? Like you still have a lot of friends, even though you say that out loud.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? That I can do both. But I think the point is that we focus on protection as the answer, right? And when you think about it, even in human life, that's not the case. Let's say I sell you a bulletproof vest as a law enforcement officer. If you get shot in the throat, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that's the thing. We talk about protection, but what we really need is a really skilled trauma surgeon. We need a really quick response team for that because we knew we were in a dangerous operation. We need a really quick ability to get that officer back and try to save a life, right? And I think to the same point, without being as histrionic, we need to be better at going, oh, there's an incident. Let's limit its damage. Let's find ways to make it so I can tell my customers how instead of it being this massive, broad access to the kingdom, that guy only had access to 1/3 of the key set needed and never actually touched your public data. Here's what happened. Nice. And it goes back to that. Being better at detection, response, and recovery is actually probably more efficacious, in my opinion, than being better at protection, right? And identification. I guess that's somewhat dependent, however. But the point being, I think that we focus too much on the wrong thing. And if we started focusing on how do you aid me in reducing the damage? How do you aid me in reducing the impact? But those are questions more mature people would ask, right? They're not this basic like lie that you could be protected by a bulletproof vest. There's no officer that walks in with that vest on that doesn't still understand their own mortality, right? And I think that's the difference. We try to tell people, here's your vest, you're good. It's not true. We send them out into a battle zone ill-prepared and with the wrong notion in their head. And I think that's this industry's fault, and it needs to change.
Right.
And you're seeing it. I bet if you and I walked through RSA together, we would see less histrionic things than we would see 3 years ago. And that's because of a maturing professional, a maturing CISO, a maturing market in general. I think.
Or just maybe customers have just had enough, and like
maybe
you know, there's it's like walking through the gauntlet, right? Trying to get you to look up the demo, and again, it's all about the next shiny.
And I always have an eye pointing to the right anyway, so they all think I'm looking at them and they get excited. It's a terrible
the next shiny object, you know, like they always want you to look at their interface as if that's going to be.
Nerds are shiny object monsters, right?
You know, it's really amazing. Like the more the GUI has more like things, the 3D things. What's the whole thing with the 3D animation going on? Like, you know,
at risk of offending my CTO, Scott Chasen, who actually did a 3D SOC where you flew around and actually jumped in on assets and looked at them like you were in a VR. It was like so cool. They sold it to Verizon. But, I think we're looking for immersion. I mean, if I'm honest, like taking the joke out of it, I think it's a try to replacement for immersion. And it's happening at a time when we're all sitting in our homes for the last 3 years, 4 years. So I have to imagine it's definitely coming from that. I'm not a big fan. I can't see 3D. I have eyes that point in two separate directions, so there's no dimensional space that I get out of that. But yeah, it's funny. But you are seeing a lot of it.
And since you have the kind of collective, you share the collective knowledge of all these MSPs that are your customers. Do you see any particular trends that are, more important than others that, without having the crystal ball, what's happening in the next 18 to 20 months? Okay.
It's all governance. Especially mid-sized market, governance for insurtech.
But
right? You're
governance for SMBs?
Yeah.
It's like
for the MSP, right? Think about that scale attribution, right? When you're saying, and a great way to say this is in the UK, there's this concept by, I can't remember the name of the organization. I apologize. There's an organization in the UK that is part of the process for the UK Cyber Essentials, and they are wanting to push a concept of having to have a license as a business for technology. And what the concept would be is you either have to be able to prove you're doing all these things as a company, right, and have an internal guy or gal that's doing it and the team and support and that, or if you go get with an MSP that's already been through this process, they'll hang their shingle on your door. And then you're now 70% of the way there.
That is so interesting because they do that a lot now. I think the same true for environmental social governance, ESG, right? So, you potentially can become green.
Right. Through others. Interactions. Yeah, same thing with carbon credits, right?
That's right. So you can get some space. So what you're saying now that there's move for that. So that you can, that's really incredible. Yeah. So that means that, from a...
That's how you would scale governance to a small business.
Right. So that means that MSPs now have an incentive, quite a bit of an incentive, a financial incentive, to get on the bandwagon, right? And
that's what I hope Trustmark becomes.
Okay.
All right. That's what I really hope, that Trustmark says, hey, you as a small business are responsible for these things, but if you hire someone with Trustmark and do their package, because at that point, to be in Trustmark, if you think about it, it's 204 controls. Like, I don't know many large enterprises that have that many controls they're answering, right, in that space. And so this includes stuff from NYDFS, that includes stuff from CCPA, it includes stuff from CIS, all 153 controls and safeguards. So 153 safeguards, rather. So if you look at what Trustmark could be, if you said as a business, if they have Trustmark, then they're doing this with their practice. I know you won't pass Trustmark if you try to have 40 different EDRs. I know you won't pass Trustmark if you have 40 different firewall vendors. I know you won't. So you're getting into a world where that normalization and passing that can actually mean something to that SMB that you could govern off of as a government, right? As a way to...
So how many of these MSSPs do you think will pass today without doing anything?
Today?
Yes.
I don't. For anybody watching, I don't want to be immune to this, so I'm going to shoot high.
Go ahead.
But I would bet 10.
Wow.
Not percent.
Wow.
I probably know 10 that are actually, and it goes back to that cobbler's shoes problem, David.
Yeah.
If you're doing security for someone else, you don't always guarantee that you have any level of that practice inside your own organization, and Trustmark's going to require that. And so when we talk about this, people asking, how long do you think it would take a normal MSP or MSSP to get through it? 2 years.
Wow.
Because it's building the processes, it's following them, it's tying to them, it's getting this actually as a living, breathing way you deliver security from something that may not have even had any of it.
So I think capitalism would drive that. So meaning that if you actually get that designation, potentially if customers ask for it, and it would say, we'll do only do business.
Insurance will not issue without it, or banking rates could be different. I mean, those are the things I see.
So I guess the 2-year endeavor will be worth it.
Oh, I think so.
Right?
Because none of it's going to be bad for you every day. Like if I start down that path and say, okay, let's do Control 1, and let's make sure that we actually have an adequate inventory. And if you read Control 1 and Safeguard 1.1 in CIS, it's a paragraph. It says, comma, and IoT, comma, and cloud, comma, and virtual, comma, and physical, comma, and BYOD, comma, and when you start thinking about it, would you have a list of your assets? Yeah. What's an asset? SpaceX actually calls their capsule an Active Directory object, right? They have a device object in there, right? So what's an asset? And so you get into that where just simply satisfying a control is not as good as it will be tomorrow. And it won't be as efficacious as protecting you as it would be tomorrow when you're including those other sources, those other devices of, wait, if somebody comes in on their home device, I don't want them to be able to access anything. Why could you say that? Maybe they would have never gotten 3CX's token to their VPN. Maybe they would have never gotten, right? Like you can get into this world where you're going to make the argument from the data, right, to do that. So I don't know. I think we will start to see a shift where people will be able to get it faster because the tools will be more structured for that. Like if you think about it, I've been working a year just to map 70 products and then 200, whatever it is, end products to CIS mapping, just for getting buy-in and getting people to understand the mission and understand why it matters to them. And to your point, why is there a capitalistic reason, Matt, that I should take my best engineer and spend 5 hours doing this with you?
That's right, because I think that's what they always do. They always look at how much time they have to invest, and they quantify it by dollars, right?
Yep.
Like how many hours of my team,
Totally,
and how we're going to quantify to revenue. So if somebody is listening to this and wanted to start in that journey to become better, what's the first step? And assuming that they didn't back out from the saying, okay, it's a 2-year thing,
Right.
Where did they actually start?
The good news is the journey is getting mapped for them for the most part, in the sense that the way Chris and team have made this, now this isn't fully public release, but there's enough data about it that I don't mind speaking about it, is that there'll be a concept of a self-attestation period, right? A self-review period, a guided review period, and then ultimately an audited period. And so that 2-year journey includes that crawl, walk, run concept, right? It maybe doesn't include stuff before crawl. So you probably have to have some basics, but getting in and having the right policies, having the right governance in place, having the right tool set in place to do it, the understanding of what's my internal processes as an MSP versus the ones I do for my client. And if you ask any MSP or they CIS, every one of them that might talk about it is going to be talking about the delivery to their client, not the fact that you as an MSP need to say, how, when you hire David, does David get a device? How does David access your systems? What does David have access to? Right? I used to say this at Iconic when I was a former MSSP. I would say, we need to live compromised. We need to understand that if 3/5 are after the boom, then we always have a boom. Let's assume that David's compromised. How can I limit his blast radius? How can I limit what he can access? How can I limit what he can do? How can I find things that tell me he's not David anymore quicker? Right? And those kind of things. And so it's, focusing on those things to get good at it is going to take a while. So I think we wanted to set it up as a longer period to let you get through it to where when you're really being assessed, you're being assessed with very, very, very judicious eyes in that regard.
And is that also true for the almost like the incidental MSPs? The two guys in the basement that somehow
trunk slammers would be the term.
Somehow they quit their job, and somebody that they knew asked them to take care of their IT, and all of a sudden, before you know, they have 5 clients.
Yep.
They pay them X, and it's a good lifestyle.
Sure, making $200,000 a year.
That's right.
Easy.
So is that also true for them, or do they have to start with somewhere even lower? Or
I don't want to mince any words on this, David. I don't think anytime you have a big change like this, everyone survives. That's just not the case. I think there's a destiny for some that shouldn't exist, right? Let's go back to my car manufacturers. John DeLorean did a lot of cocaine and made a car, but ultimately didn't make it as a long-term player in the industry for a lot of reasons, right?
For the obvious reasons.
So let's put it in perspective. I think that there will always be a place for consultancy. I think in the nature of what we're seeing happen in technology, that a 2-person MSP shop could actually very effectively do this for SMBs. I think they would have to be very, very purposeful in how they do it, right? Your separation of duty gets really hard. It's now wearing 2 separate hats, maybe wearing 2 different YubiKeys. Now it's those kind of weird things that need to exist to make that still functional. But I think the tech is getting easier. If you go back to my vision of saying if I started a company, it would only be X. Well, if I'm only going to start with Okta or Microsoft, I can script every customer the same way. So there is a way where some of those could actually make this work. But in the traditional sense, we have no barrier to entry. If I want to be an MSP, one of my best posts ever on LinkedIn, it was like 200,000 views, was I just wrote MSP on a sticky note and slapped it to a window, right? And it was like, it just resonated. People are like, yeah, that's what it takes to be an MSP, is just write your name on it and get a phone book ad and you're done. Is that even a thing anymore? Maybe I'm showing my age. But
there are promising tools, though, like that they offer.
And they can go get them readily. That just doesn't mean they know how to use them. Doesn't mean they're good at it.
And by the way, I think misconfigured tools are one of the worst, absolutely worst. It makes you this sense of comfort that you're doing the right thing, and then all of a sudden everything blows up and you didn't have it.
Yeah.
The logs
and
turn
part of that's back on the vendor.
Right.
Part of that, again, friends and sometimes frenemies, but that I would push that back on the vendor. Why would you set it up to where I have to do something to make it secure in your platform, right? I get it with a SKU. Like, I get it if Microsoft's saying, we'll add this capability for a SKU. I get that. But even when you add that capability, it's not configured. Even when you add that extra SKU, it doesn't set up the back end things. It doesn't do the things. In fact, most of the work I do in Intune and in Autopilot and all the things that are in that beautiful Microsoft ecosystem is just being a translator to their terrible documentation for it, right? Like, no, that's not how this really works. Let me tell you how this really works. This is what you actually see on the back end, that kind of thing. And so I think there's a big growth area for vendors to make it secure by default so that you don't have misconfigurations by default. Yes, I can be stupid. Yes, I can go turn off things, but they're not insecure by default, right? And I think that's part of the problem. But to your point, if you're using a tool you don't know how to use, it's really kind of, it's much worse than having the tool in some ways. In fact, it was funny. It was talking about the differences in CIS 8 and what I think needs to exist for 8.1. When I was trying to map MDR products, managed detection and response for an EDR, there were actually not many new controls. There's only one. I only found a review as being one of those things that I think actually goes into that MDR. And the reason for that is when they wrote 10.1 that says use anti-malware, they assumed you knew how to use it. They assumed you had the peoples. But that's not true, right? So, yeah.
And what about the vendors that are building a product, right? So most of them build a product, and then at some point in time, they see the shiny object being the MSSP to go to market, right?
Yeah.
Oh, they will go after the MSSPs. Well, each has 5 to 25, 30 customers, and immediately we quadruple our
instant
market.
scale, yeah.
But it doesn't work like that. Are there any vendors out there that purposely built products for service providers, or is it something that's always an afterthought?
That's a great question. If it's coming from enterprise internal IT, enterprise security, going to a MSP, MSSP, it's almost never right for that MSSP because of the multi-tenancy differences, because of the needs and the role-based access control differences, things like that. But if you're built, ironically, in our world for the multi-tenant providers, for these service providers, the maturity has been extremely low. And so if you look at my middle theory, the products that come out of that have had an extremely low maturity because the demand isn't there. Yes, they're better at multi-tenant. Yes, they're better at some of those things. But when I try to do something as simple as saying, hey, when David works for me in Dallas, on Team Charlie in Dallas, I want him to have access to 6 customers, and that's it. When he moves to Team Charlie and his access moves, I want him to lose access to B and C. Well, do you have SSO and SCIM provisioning? No. Oh, what? Just accounts and just manually add his name to the company? That doesn't. So you get one or the other. The enterprise products that are a little more mature because they've had more mature eyes on them and discernment on them are often very poor for our side. And then the stuff that's born on our side is often only to the level of maturity of most of the consuming entity. And so it's a very weak product and it's not very good. But then you find those people that cross over well, like SentinelOne was one of the early ones, I think, to cross down into multi-tenant management, the ability to scale that, policy management, things like that. And they grew asymptotically in our space, right? If you ask most MSPs serving the SMB what they think their best antivirus product or EDR product is going to be, they're going to say SentinelOne. Now, CrowdStrike may not like that, and those other things may not like that, but they did it well. They got in the understanding of, and actually, this takes us all the way back to full circle. Do you know why I think they got it well? They were API first, no console first. They built the console afterwards. You know what that means? They were healthy and could do the things we asked them to do from a multi-tenancy perspective, right? So
that is amazing. Yeah, all the pieces come together for sure. And is there a place for MSSPs for MSSPs?
Yes, I think so. I think they're converging. I stand very firmly, especially in the SMB market, that you can't protect data in a vacuum. You can't just be a managed service security provider, managed security services provider, and not know what the assets are and not have any communication with the clients and have this complete abject layer provider between me and the... So I think you're seeing a bit of a convergence, but that convergence is either forcing MSPs to actually add the extra capabilities that are necessary to compete, or find better partnerships with MSSPs that do allow them, that do focus on that, and can have a better playbook, a better run book, a better understanding of the data. And this came to me, we hired an MSSP, I was paying him, I think, $8,000 a month for our 180 employees or so as MSPs. So I wanted someone to watch the watcher, right? That was the argument I made. One day, a threat actor bought a similar authentication domain, it was an IGN homophone technique, to mine. And I noticed it and said, hey, we're getting spammed with this. People are being attacked with this. There's malware. I was able to Joe Sandbox it, and there was malware there. And I said, can we dig into this with my MSSP? And I said, how many people have been there? And they said, well, 2. I said, well, I'm sitting in a room with 6. So what did you look at? Well, just the firewall. What about the SIEM? What about all the data you're collecting? What about the aggregation? What about this tied down to a single identity and their site being able to, oh, we only go to that if you ask us. Like, we don't really, wait, you're not highly integrated into these things? You're just kind of watching telemetry on individual tools? Like, how does this even make sense? What am I paying you for? I can buy tools. And I think to the point that that company ended up selling for $1 billion and still had that poor of technique and management.
That is crazy.
And it's
So you were a nightmare customer too.
probably, yeah. I mean, from that definition, I was, because I actually wanted efficaciousness and delivery of what they're paid for. Yeah. Anyways, but I say that to say, I think there's room for partnership. I think there's room for that, but the maturity across the board has to really rise in the SMB serving market.
Mm-hmm. But you, as an evangelist with Pax8, are moving the needle on that.
Hopefully.
And so, what's exciting for Pax8? You mentioned it's 70 vendors. What else is down the pipe? You guys are always working on the portal. Always working on adding additional components
so much.
Yeah, and you're growing as a customer, as a company, right?
Yeah, we're over the $1 billion recurring revenue.
That is incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah. So what else is that?
We were a Soonicorn, and now we're a unicorn. Right? No, we are always changing and growing. The platform side of things is going to get much more data intensive. It's going to get much more integrated in the products. We're doing a lot of really cool stuff. Scott Chasen, coming on about a year ago, I think he's added 20 product managers or something. Like we'd never really thought of ourselves as a product before this.
So the idea would be like a single pane of glass. Is that
I don't like
to use that term because it's been
I would probably say more a single point of integration.
Okay.
Is the way I might say that in that regard. But I'm also not the owner of that. That is Scott Chasen and his amazing team. I'm the pretty evangelist that goes out and screams about cyber to the industry. So
are people currently customers are currently using the all the integration? What's the how do you, or is there a pilot, or what's the program?
We really started in that billing integration, tying it down to being able to extract the value for the things you're already selling, integrating that. But, again, back to that point, we have really big API centrism of everything we've done, which means there's a lot of configurability that hasn't been on the table, too, that might be part of that landscape as we go forward. But today, nope, this is mostly idea state. But, constantly we added Academy last year. We're training. I do now teach 2 classes myself, right? One on CIS, one on policy development. But we are growing that side of it a lot, so that's probably the best to talk about right now. We've got a couple of new hire additions that are coming on. We just brought on Rob Ray, who's big in our channel, and also a couple people that I can't speak about yet that are be really amazing hires. So we're going to be building more of that community, to your point, in the next year. And
we can't adjourn without talking about ChatGPT and AI.
Oh man, everybody's got to.
What's your take? Are we? People are always saying that this is going to be the next, Skynet, and people are very fearful. Do you find that that's the case? Is anybody else talking about it?
I think we're careening towards general AI anyway. I think we've always been careening towards that. That's always been the goal and the thought. I think ChatGPT, the reason it's gotten so much splash is it's probably the first model that's been brought out as a functional thing. Right, the ability to go ask Jeeves, if you will, about everything. Maybe that one's already taken. It probably is. It was a long time ago. But the ability to go out and have some iterative gathering of information in one place that's cogent and weighted and well written has been fascinating for people. But there's just as many errors in it. It can be trained to do a lot of bad data too. And I think that the interesting part of this is it's fascinating and it's going to continue to grow, and we'll keep seeing people develop off of it. I've seen 3 or 4 amazing products built off of that type of architecture already. Right?
Speaking of which, some of them it's almost like a monkey business where they take an output for ChatGPT through the APIs you mentioned, and then wrap it up with some nice shiny
all day. Back to your point of what do you map to on CIS,
and then resell it. It's an easy productization of something.
But what some people are using it for is taking tons of unstructured data and placing it somewhere that can be made meaningful sense of and ask questions of it, right? And so you see people that are taking existing data sets, like Nicholas Callahan, right, the guy that used to be Air Force security. He built a company called Ask. I don't want to butcher it. It was a cool name, but it's a female name. But anyways, like Ask Sonia or something. and it's taking all of this DIB, 853, CMMC, all of that data together for defense contractors and people in the defense space, in U.S. defense space, to use and ask questions of this structured data now, right? Unstructured, that's been brought into and trained into a GPT model. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they're just taking the tech and making profit on it. I think to the question asked about the fearfulness, I think when you think about it, the data has already been made public by us ourselves. A threat actor's already doing a lot of this stuff.
That's right.
Right? But to your point of, could it speed up a lot of things? Oh, definitely. Definitely, right? You could speed up a lot of OSINT work. You could speed up a lot of data gathering. You could train data sets to do things there. But that's always been coming. And I don't think this is that big of a milestone in the defense.
Yeah, no, right. Malware. I mean, and now it's the biggest thing is everything's moving so fast. They're saying, well, ChatGPT is old school, old news. Now
Right.
it's auto GPT, right? The ability to reiterate on the AI model over and over again, and then now connectivity
We
to
have
the
public
web.
services. You can buy it on Azure. You can buy it on AWS and play with it yourself. I mean, definitely. Yeah.
So, well, is our practitioners are about to, is there like the last practitioner already been born?
No,
do you think, or no?
I don't think we're there. Although, I mean, if you really left it to AI, it would be the same decisions we don't want to make, I think, ultimately. Maybe I'm getting out on a limb here, but I would say, like, the right decision would be you cannot sell a product that doesn't have passwordless resistant MFA or phish resistant MFA. It's a passwordless model. Like, you can just do that. And if I was AI and I was solving the problem, the data would be just as clear to me in AI of, well, the real problem here is people don't follow the fucking baselines, and there's no capitalistic reward for them doing the right shit. So I don't know. I think we're already heading down the path where automation replaces a lot of traditional practitioner work. I think if you looked at that model I talked about where it's all Azure AD or it's all Okta or it's all a combination of 3 or 5 of them or whatever it is, then I can API most of that, which means that I can also probably automate most of that, which means that I can now put logic into it that's tied to maybe better AI models that allow me to actually combine all that to a very, very good practice. So I would say in that model, in that definition, yes. I don't think it'll ever replace the human understanding of business. And I think that's what we should be better at thinking about anyway as practitioners of, my job eventually won't be turning wrenches. My job eventually will be saying what bolt needs to be in that place to make this business objective solved the best, which means you're shifting from more of a tactical, commoditizable work stream to a consultant, to a strategist, to somebody that can tie the right technology platforms to the strategy.
That's right. And creativity is going to be rewarded as well, which is something that I don't think is going to be replicated anytime soon.
No, not the creativity. I mean, for sure. Maybe the seemingness of that creativity, but not real creativity, right? Yeah. So I agree.
Well, I love the positive tone, so.
Well, that's my jam. I'd rather be positive. If I'm still going to eat a poop sandwich, I'd rather smile about it.
So until then, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you? And assuming you're going to update your traveling blog.
It's always LinkedIn. And the travel blog, I think someone's definitely going to update my travel blog. We haven't done it this year, but I think I'm at 22 flights this year. I ended at 100 and almost 140, I think, last year is where I was at, 130 something. But best way is LinkedIn. That's my daily driver. I'm in LinkedIn every day. And then
what's your handle on LinkedIn?
Cybermatt Lee.
Okay, awesome.
I was nobody else's Cybermatt Lee, so I got Cybermatt Lee everywhere. It was great. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's been a real pleasure to have you in person today.
Always, brother. Get to see you in 3D.
Yeah, likewise. And I'll probably bump into you in the after hour events tonight.
Very good, my friend.
Take
see you
care.
later.
Thank you very much.